Chapter 11. Out of Left Field. Danny's first baseball game was the following morning. Nick's father was like a little kid with tickets to the World Series. He'd never been quite as excited for Nick's games. It wasn't that he loved Nick any less. He always took it for granted that Nick would play good ball. On the other hand, Danny playing any ball whatsoever was cause for celebration. Nick truly wanted to support his brother, but after the troubling day with Mitch, he had tossed and turned in bed with all manner of nightmares. Billions of stolen pennies hailing from the sky, light bulbs that attracted man-eating moths, and Petula's red satin dress. These were the dark specters of his dreams. That being the case, he had no intention of going anywhere that morning. But at 7:54 a.m., Danny somehow managed to pull down the attic stairs. He climbed up and began bouncing on Nick's bed with his brand new cleats, somehow forgetting that Nick's shins were directly under the covers. Nick knocked him off of the bed and onto a pile of dirty clothes that was gathered in the center of the room.
"Safe!"
Danny said. "Out!" Nick demanded, pointing to the ladder.
"Not until you come too."
Then he looked at Nick a little bit oddly.
"Why's your bed here?"
"What do you mean?" But when Nick looked around, he saw what Danny meant. His bed was no longer against the wall. Neither was his desk. Both had migrated about 2 feet away from their respective spots toward the center of the attic. It was too early to think about such irritatingly unexpected things, so he just pushed the furniture back where it was supposed to be, shooed Danny out, and reluctantly got dressed for his brother's game. Nick tried to make the best of it. Maybe, he thought, a pee-wee baseball game would be just the thing to distract him from the weirdness that had surrounded him ever since arriving here. Sadly, this was not to be the case. The local community athletic park was one of those massive suburban sports complexes, boasting 4 baseball diamonds, 6 soccer fields, too many tennis and basketball courts to count, and even a hockey rink. Unfortunately, there were only about 12 parking spaces. So after a half-mile trek from the parking lot of a Taco Bell, Nick and his overenthusiastic father took their seats in the stands. All around them were strangers, but here and there a face seemed familiar. Nick wondered if maybe some of these people had been at the garage sale, and if there might be a sneaky way of finding out what they had bought and what the object in question did. They all rose for the Star-Spangled Banner, and Nick was filled with the classically conditioned anticipation of the first pitch. True, he was feeling some sour grapes over the fact that he wasn't pitching for the team he had tried out for, which was now playing on the next diamond over. But he had to admit he felt excited and also a bit anxious for his brother's debut. Especially when Danny, playing right field, ran out to left field by mistake.
"If the ball goes over my head, do I get a do-over?"
Danny had asked that morning.
"Just catch it,"
Nick had told him,
"and you'll never have to worry."
The first batter on the opposing team got on base with a line drive that the shortstop bobbled. The second batter was walked. The third batter, however, hit a pop-up into shallow right field. Danny, with the steely concentration with which he might do a long division problem, held up his mitt and, wonder of wonders, the ball dropped straight into it, as if somehow that had been the batter's intent. Nick's father leaped up so suddenly it sent a neighboring parent's popcorn flying. "Yeah, Danny! Woohoo!" Nick looked over at their stunned neighbor, who now had little butter stains dotting her blouse. Dad?" Seeing what he had done, Nick's father sat down, a little embarrassed. "Sorry," he said, grabbing the empty popcorn tub and handing it to his son. "Nick, do me a favor. Go to the snack bar and get this nice woman a refill. My treat." As incentive, he gave Nick enough money to get something for himself. But as he left, Nick heard the woman say,
Not to worry. My son got me this electric stain remover at a garage sale. Never saw anything like it.
Nick was so busy pondering the possible misuses of an electric stain remover designed by a mad genius that he didn't even notice who was coming up beside him in the concession line until he felt a hand tap his shoulder.
Okay if I cut in line?
Caitlin asked.
After all, you owe me for standing me up yesterday.
Anyone else might have looked over the top in a shocking pink t-shirt and matching sunglasses, but Caitlin made it work. "I didn't stand you up," Nick reminded her. "I left you a message. Trust me, Mitch would have been a basket case if I didn't go with him to visit his father."
In the pen? You're braver than I thought.
She stepped forward to stand next to him.
So what brings you out here?
"My little brother's game. How about you?" Caitlin glanced quickly at the adjacent diamond, then back at Nick.
I'm a soft pretzel addict. What can I say?
Nick knew better. "You're here to watch Theo, aren't you? Don't tell me you're still together with him."
No. Yes. I don't know.
She folded her arms, frustrated by the question, or maybe a little frustrated with herself.
Honestly, it may be force of habit more than anything. I was taught to recycle instead of throw things away.
So melt him into a lawn chair and donate it to Goodwill. Then she gave Nick an accusing look.
Why do you care? I heard you went on a date with Petula the other night.
This was wrong on so many levels, Nick didn't know where to begin. "Who told you that?" Caitlin shrugged.
Nobody. She posted the restaurant surveillance video on her Facebook page.
"It wasn't a date. I was just getting information."
If you say so.
Then she ordered her soft pretzel and was triumphantly smug. Nick got the replacement popcorn and a soda for himself. He was ready to head back to the bleachers alone when Caitlin rested her hand gently on his arm.
Lead the way,
she said. "Huh?"
I want to be part of your brother's cheering squad. It'll be much better than watching fans of the opposing team throw peanuts at Theo.
What?
He's allergic to peanuts. Apparently, there's no rule against anaphylactic heckling.
The fact that Caitlin chose to come back to the stands with him, rather than go to watch Theo's game, made Nick's day. He thought of offering her his hand to help her over the staggered bleacher rows, which are hard enough to navigate even without 100 people in the way, but he decided that such a move would be a little too forward. The second inning had started, and Danny's team was in the field again. Still no score. But there was a man on second and no outs. Nick hoped the double wasn't due to an error on Danny's part. "Line drive right past the third baseman," his father told him, as if reading his mind. "It was a solid hit. Lucky it was just a double." "Dad, this is my friend Caitlin," Nick said. "Hi," his father said absently, keeping his eyes on the game.
I hear you played Major League,
Caitlin said. That was enough to get him to turn toward her. "For a couple of years, once upon a time."
That's more than most people can say.
He accepted the compliment graciously, then looked at Nick and, with an extremely embarrassing wink, said, "Glad to see you're making friends." Before it could get any more awkward, they heard the crack of a bat. A ball soared deep between the center fielder and Danny. Both ran toward the fly ball. It was clearly the center fielder's catch to make. In fact, he even called it. But as the ball came down, Danny held up his glove and it slammed into the sweet spot with a satisfying thud. It was as if the baseball had curved ever so slightly in midair. As a pitcher, Nick knew that spin could make a ball do mystical things, but that usually happened when it was flying toward a batter, not away. But why look a gift horse in the mouth? If today was Danny's day, then it was his day. Nick's dad jumped up again, this time careful not to bump into the woman's popcorn, and he cheered louder than any parent. Nick joined in, although not quite as loudly.
"Your brother's pretty good,"
Caitlin said. Nick swelled with pride. Warming to his brother's success was easing his own disappointment at not making a team. The next ball that came toward Danny was in the following inning. A missile smacked by a kid who looked way too old to be in this age group. The ball was clearly going out of the park, and through one of the 12 windshields in the parking lot. Danny backed up as far as he could until he hit the outfield fence. He held up his glove futilely. And then, in mid-flight, the arc of the ball suddenly changed. It plunged downward like a crashing plane, landing right in Danny's glove. The crowd gasped. "No way!" someone shouted. "Did you see that?"
"Did it hit a bird?"
someone else asked. "Maybe it was the wind." Caitlin looked at Nick with a kind of fear in her eyes, and that's when he knew. "Dad?" he asked. "That's not your old glove, is it?" And his father said, "Nope. It's from your garage sale." He grinned, all puffed with pride at his prodigy in the field. "I put $5 in your box. Worth every penny." Nick stood up. "How many outs is that?" Nick asked. "2, his father said. "Try to pay attention." Nick looked back at Caitlin. They weren't just on the same page. They might as well have been reading each other's mind.
"We can't take it from him in the middle of an inning,"
Caitlin said. But it was more than that. "We can't take it from him at all." Because how could Nick tell his brother that his moment to shine wasn't really his moment? That he was nothing but an accessory to the glove? There was a grounder to the shortstop, and the batter got on base. Then a short pop that the pitcher dropped. Man on first and second. A line drive past the third baseline, and the bases were loaded. But Nick wasn't worried about the guys on base. He was worried about the next batter. A big kid who was clearly planning on a grand slam. He swung at the first pitch, connected, and the ball sailed high into left field. The crowd was on their feet, screaming with anticipation. The left fielder positioned himself, but the ball began to curve like a boomerang away from left field, over the head of the center fielder, and straight toward Danny. Danny's jaw dropped practically to his knees. He positioned his mitt as the ball sailed toward it. But then something roared more loudly than the crowd, and from out of the sky came a ball of fire trailing a plume of black smoke. The plummeting fireball hit the baseball, instantly incinerating it, then slammed into the sweet spot of Danny's glove. The force of the impact ripped Danny off his feet. He flew backwards, dragged through the grass, and actually dug a trench before he finally came to a stop inches from the right field fence. For a moment, no one moved. The crowd had fallen into silent shock. Then, all at once, the kids in the field screamed and started running in different directions in a panic. Nick, his father, and Caitlin leaped over rows of people and out onto the field, where they sprinted toward Danny, who lay on his back, his mitt still smoking. Their dad reached him first. "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay," he said, cradling his son. Danny looked up at them with dazed eyes.
Did I catch it? Yeah, Danny, Nick said. You did.
He gingerly pulled the glove from Danny's hand. There, smoldering inside it, was a chunk of red-hot stone about the size of a grapefruit. Danny had caught a meteorite. As there was nothing in the rulebook about unexpected cosmic events, the game was called due to severe weather conditions. Police were brought in to hold back gawking crowds who had abandoned all the other sports being played that day. As for the field in question, it was cordoned off as a disaster area, and it looked like one, with abandoned gloves and hats lying on the field, forgotten by panicking players, as well as a single forlorn cleat that appeared to be trying to steal third base. Paramedics arrived to evaluate Danny, who should have, at the very least, suffered a shoulder dislocated to the next county, but he didn't seem to be injured at all. "Could you tell us exactly what happened?" the paramedics asked him while his father paced, still unable to wrap his mind around it.
I held up my glove and caught a shooting star,
Danny said brightly.
Do I get on the news?
Nick and Caitlin watched all this unfold without any power to control or direct it. But it seemed that someone else was doing the controlling.
There's something odd here,
Caitlin pointed out to Nick. Understatement of the millennium, Nick replied.
No, I'm talking about what your brother said. He's right. He should be on the news. But we've been here for nearly an hour, and have you seen a single reporter?
She was right. No reporters, no news vans. A piece of sky just fell into some kid's hand. That's not just a local human interest story. That's national news. World news. But no one was reporting it. Why? What they got instead of news vans was a fleet of shimmering white SUVs bursting onto the field, all identical to the one that had showed up at Nick's garage sale. Out of the SUVs stepped at least a dozen people, men and women, all well-dressed. Their clothes, just as at the garage sale, were pearly pastel shades. Nick grabbed Caitlin's wrist. I know these guys, he said. Some of them, anyway.
Who are they?
Nick thought about the business card that kept reappearing no matter how many times he'd thrown it away. He couldn't remember the name on it, and suspected he had intentionally blocked it out. Creepy dudes with a lot of money, he told her. Caitlin grimaced.
That's the worst kind.
On a crazy hunch, Nick reached into his pocket, and he felt something in there that had the shape and texture of a business card. He refused to pull it out to see if it really was. Sports Park Security, the first line of defense, intercepted the approaching team of men and women. The tall man from the garage sale was in the lead. This time, the way his suit caught the light, it appeared more pale peach than vanilla. He showed some kind of badge, and the security guard backed off, as if the guy were radioactive. Next, the police tried to stop them as they crossed the field. The man flashed his badge again. The cops seemed apologetic and waved them through. The well-dressed team fanned out with equipment that looked like metal detectors and dowsing rods. While they examined the field, Mr. Peaches and Cream made a beeline for the slates. When Nick's father saw the man approaching, he left Danny sitting in the back of the ambulance. "Can I help you?" Mr. Slate asked. Nick and Caitlin watched, keeping a little distance. The man flashed his badge, and his father looked at it. "You're from the Department of Defense?" "So it would seem," the man said, flipping the badge holder closed. I understand there was an incident here today. I'd like to talk to you about it. It wasn't an incident, Nick's father said, already defensive. It was a meteorite, not a missile attack. Not exactly a matter of national security. If you're from the DOD, then you're wasting your time. The man gave Nick's father a patronizing grin. Just doing our jobs, sir. Is it true that your son caught this meteorite? Nick's father looked away. So, stranger things have happened? Which wasn't exactly true, and they both knew it. Right about then, the paramedics pulled Nick's father away to fill out some paperwork. As he went, Mr. Slate gave Mr. Peaches and Cream a suspicious look. Then the man turned his head smoothly, like an owl, zeroing in on Nick, and Nick felt his blood temperature drop a few degrees. Hello, Nick, he said. Good to see you again. Nick turned to Caitlin for support, but she was gone. The man put his hand out to shake, but Nick didn't take it. You don't trust me. I don't blame you. Trust must be earned. If you're from the Defense Department, why didn't you say so at the garage sale? Nick asked. Defense, said a passing policeman. These guys are with the FBI. Nick put his hands on his hips. So which is it? The man whipped out his badge, flipping the cover open. You tell me. Nick looked at the official ID and read it out loud. Dr. Alan Jorgensen, Dark Lord of the Sith? Jorgensen sighed and rolled his eyes. So it would seem. What is this, some kind of joke? A little embarrassed, Jorgensen put the badge away. It's not an ID badge. It's a neuroantagonistic mirror. When you look at it, it reflects back the most intimidating thing you expect to see. Sorry, said Nick. I don't believe in magic. Good for you, said Jorgensen. Neither do we. It's science. It may appear as magic to the less enlightened, but people like you and me can see through it to the truth. Scientific smoke and mirrors practically applied. He smiled. It's like that quantum business card I gave you. I'm sure it's turned up in unlikely places, has it not? He waited for an answer, but Nick refused to give him one. Well, Jorgensen continued, quantum physics dictates that it will remain a part of your life until you physically hand it to someone else. Then it becomes their problem. How about the funky suits? Nick had to ask. More smoke and mirrors? Yes, said Jorgensen, without hesitating. They're made of the fabric of time and space. He paused for a beat, then said, That's a joke. And when Nick still didn't laugh, he smoothed out his suit jacket. It's Madagascan spider silk. Very rare. Very comfortable. I could get you an outfit if you like. That succeeded in making Nick laugh, mainly because Jorgensen was serious. Nick looked around at the man's colleagues and the odd devices they were using on the baseball field. So who are you really? He asked. We're scientists from the University of Colorado. Nothing more or less sinister than that. And then he cut to the chase. Now, maybe your father and everyone else here thinks this was some random event, but you and I both know it wasn't. So please, Nick, in the name of science, why don't you tell me exactly how that meteorite was pulled out of the sky? Suddenly, from behind them, Danny said,
It was me. I caught it all by myself.
He climbed out of the ambulance. "Danny, be quiet," Nick said.
I've been catching stuff all day. I'm really good at it. I never thought I'd catch a falling star, though. Hey! Don't I get a wish or something?
Jorgensen knelt down to Danny's level. Nick watched as the man's eyes, smooth as spider silk, slid to the glove sitting on the bumper of the ambulance behind them. Then his gaze turned back to Danny, and he smiled broadly. "And what might that wish be, young man?" "Excuse me," said their father angrily, stomping away from the paramedics. "Who gave you permission to talk to my sons?" Jorgensen stood, a bit flustered. "I apologize if I was a little forward." "Since when does the DOD interrogate children?" Jorgensen put up his hands. "Let's not get carried away." A woman from Jorgensen's team, as sharply groomed as he, brought him the charred chunk of space rock. Jorgensen held it up, turning it in his hand, regarding it like it was a crystal ball. "Is this it? Remarkable."
And?
Said Danny, reaching up and grabbing it from him.
It's mine.
"That's right," said Mr. Slate. "First rule of baseball. You catch it, you keep it."
Besides, Nick said, a meteorite is like a piece of land, right? It belongs to the first person who claims it, fair and square.
"Can't argue with that," said their father with a smug grin. "Now, if the United States government wants to seize my son's property, I'm sure there's some slow, painful legal process that can get you what you want." Jorgensen gave an exasperated sigh. "No one said anything about seizing your property. We're willing to pay for the meteorite." Then he nodded toward the bumper of the ambulance. "And the glove that caught it, of course."
Dad, no!
said Danny. Jorgensen pulled out a pad and wrote down a number. "Will this amount be sufficient?" He showed the paper to Nick's father. His eyes widened, but only slightly. "Well."
No way!
said Danny. So Nick's father stood firm. "Sorry, it's not for sale." "How about now?" Jorgensen showed him another, higher number. Nick's father was like a house of cards ready to fold until he saw Danny's eyes filling with tears. That's when Nick jumped in. "Which is more important, Dad? Money or your son?" Their father took a deep breath and turned his house of cards into a stone fortress. "I'm sorry. My decision is final." And Nick thought it was over. Until Jorgensen produced a checkbook. "I'll tell you what, Mr. Slate. I understand you've been out of work. As it so happens, I know of an opening at NORAD for a man just like you, with your qualities." "A job?" their father said. "The benefits are excellent. This check represents your first month's salary." He filled out the check and handed it to his father. Nick didn't see the amount of the paycheck, but whatever it was, it made his father turn to Danny and say, "Give the man his rock." Jorgensen wrenched the meteorite out of Danny's hands against the boy's protests. "And the glove," reminded Jorgensen.
Forget you!
Danny cried, although forget was not precisely the word he used. "Let it go, Danny," said Nick. "It's probably better with them anyway." He went to retrieve the mitt, then held it out to Jorgensen. "If this gets Dad a job, then it's worth it." Jorgensen took the mitt, but he seemed a little suspicious as he looked it over. Rather unremarkable, isn't it? It's clearly old, but it shows very little sign of wear, and the pocket, it's perfectly clean. Nick took a deep breath. He knew that the mitt showed absolutely no sign of having caught a red-hot hunk of iron. This fact wasn't lost on Jorgensen, an observant man. Very observant. "What is that you have there, Nick?" Jorgensen asked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on. What are you hiding behind your back?" Jorgensen reached behind Nick and found the other mitt that he was hiding. This one was also old, and it showed heavy wear, as though it had been through a war. Jorgensen smiled. "I believe that is the glove I just purchased," he said. Nick looked down, his face going red. "Well played, Nick," Jorgensen said, taking the glove and dropping the first one on the ground. He studied the stretch marks in the glove's pocket. "You almost had me." He handed it to one of his associates, who slipped the mitt in a plastic bag and quickly trotted back to where the SUVs waited. Back in control and infinitely pleased with himself, Jorgensen turned to Nick's father. "The job is real. The salary is real. You and your boys will come to see that we are very much your friends." Then he turned and left, while Danny looked at the ground, kicking up sod with his cleats. Nick still looked away, red in the face. Caitlin came running back from wherever she had disappeared to.
Nick, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry.
Nick glanced at the scientists getting back into their vehicles and driving off the field. "Don't worry about it," he said.
"Well, maybe this will make you feel better,"
she said.
"I was going around doing my best to be a general nuisance and find out from the other scientists what they were up to. They gave me the garbage you might expect. We're taking readings, we're looking for anomalies, blah, blah, blah. Basically trying to sound scientific without saying much of anything. And then the guy who was measuring the trench Danny created tripped over a clump of sod, and this fell off his lapel."
She held out to Nick a gold pin, smaller than a thumbnail. It looked like the letter A, but the crossbar, instead of being a straight line, was a figure 8, the symbol of infinity. "Wait a second," Nick said. "Jorgensen had a pin too."
"They all do,"
whispered Caitlin. Then, with a smile, she said,
"So they have something of yours, and now you have something of theirs."
Nick looked up and watched the last of the SUVs pull off the field. "Who says they have something of mine?" Then he reached down to the grass and picked up the baseball glove that Jorgensen had dismissively discarded. This was the glove that Nick had so freely offered Jorgensen, the one that showed no signs of ever having caught anything, much less a meteorite. The corners of Caitlin's mouth curled into a smile.
"You didn't."
"Hey," said Nick, shrugging. "He's the one who specifically requested the one I was holding behind my back, which was, I believe, dropped by the second baseman when he ran screaming off the field." Caitlin looked at him admiringly.
"That,"
she said,
"was masterful."
"No," Nick said. "Just smoke and mirrors, practically applied."